Okay, so welcome everybody. Let's see if I can find it. Oops, I don't have that screen share. Coming. Sorry, it's not bringing up my lecture very quickly, but it's here somewhere, I know. There it is. Okay, can everybody see our lecture? Spirit knowledge, the great plan in the spirit world. So welcome. This is a discussion of Pathwork lecture number 11, called Self-Knowledge, the Great Plan in the Spirit World. And this is an early one. So this is September 3rd, 1957. And I found that it had some interesting, understandings of this part of what, I think the guide is asking us to do is to learn to make contact with the spirit world ourselves, to receive guidance, to connect to our higher self, to seek, God's will, this kind of thing. And that we also, when we do ask, can get some important help. So he goes into quite some detail, and this is a relatively long lecture. We may not get all the way through it. There's quite a few interesting Q&As as well in this. But that said, I'm gonna just start reading, and please feel free to jump in with any questions or comments. Does anybody have, if you got a chance to read it, any opening observation or comment they want to make at this time? So it says, in the name of God and Jesus Christ, I greet you, my friends. I bring you blessings. I bring you love. So he's saying new friends have found their way here. Sometimes what he's saying will be sort of not new to people that have been following his teachings for a little while. But there's a way in which, each one of us can still find tonight inspiration and help to overcome a particular difficulty. For it is often necessary to hear the same thing again and again until it becomes deep knowledge and enlightenment as compared to superficial intellectual knowledge. So I love that he says that. It amazes me that he's saying that, with lecture 11, because, somehow, it seems like people are already being impatient or feeling like they should have, gotten the whole 9 yards already, and here we are just in the beginning. So he says, deep within the heart of each human being is the longing for happiness. Now, what is happiness? If you ask different people, you will receive different answers. The spiritually immature will say that if they had this or that fulfillment or a worry eliminated, they could be happy. In other words, happiness would mean certain wishes are gratified. And yet, he's saying even if these wishes came true, these people would not be happy. They would still feel a deep-seated unrest, would have an undefinable bad conscience. Why? Because happiness does not depend on outer circumstances or other people, no matter how convinced the spiritually immature person is of this fallacy. Spiritually mature people know this. They know that they themselves are solely responsible for their happiness or unhappiness. They know that they are capable of creating a happy life, first within themselves, but then also inevitably in their outer life. The spiritually immature think that happiness has to be created first on the outer level, because outer circumstances, which are not necessarily brought about by them, have to fit their wishes. And when this is achieved, happiness will follow. So the spiritually mature know that it is exactly the other way around. So I'm going to pause just a quick minute And I just remembered I was going to invite one other person and never did. So I'm going to send something out real quick. Um, yeah, okay. I guess I'm showing all of this to y'all, aren't I? I forget. Okay, how to get out of here now. Okay, sorry about that. So, this is where I find, that, in the very beginning, the guide is very clear, and it's a difficult message for us really to hear, that it really is not so much about the outer circumstances, but in a way, how we can be harmoniously with whatever the outer circumstances are bringing. And sometimes that's very challenging, because outer circumstances are challenging. But again, if we just kind of hunker down into this, attempt to control the outer circumstances or to gain happiness that way, basically we're, missing the depth of the inner capacity that we really have for within ourselves. And we need to develop that. That's a part of the evolutionary maturational process. So he says, we don't want to acknowledge this truth. It's easier to blame fate, the injustice of destiny and higher powers or circumstances brought about by other people than it is to blame oneself. Now, here I don't like the word blame exactly. I think it's not exactly what is meant when we talk about self-responsibility. But, the truth is that's often what we do is we either blame the outer place or then the other thing is to blame ourselves, right? And it's very difficult for us to take responsibility when we're doing this blaming thing. So, it it also contributes to, feeling like a victim, like we're a victim of our own self, in some way. If we see, if we start thinking that, we're to blame, right? It's more of a learning curve. It's more of like an educational process, right? And so we want to see and choose, essentially, is the way to look at these things, and to realize that we can't always choose correctly, and then we discover, something in the choice that we made that, has a result, and that result is not a punishment, but is a way of helping us recognize, and adjust or reconsider and look deeper. So in that way, one, by being a victim does not have to search sometimes very deeply with a maximum of honesty within oneself. And yet the great truth is happiness lies in our own hands. And it is in your power to find happiness. You may ask, what must I do? But let us first see what happiness means in the spiritually mature sense. So this is where also I think he takes an interesting twist here in the beginning. And again, this use of the word God sometimes is difficult in our time, right? But I like this lecture in the way that it's sort of like it does extend, this understanding of finding God into this understanding of, finding our guides and our own higher self divinity and that kind of thing, right? So he's saying that, in the spiritually mature sense, happiness, it means finding God. It means simply God. Finding God is the only way happiness can be found. And it can be found right here and right now. And that's another important thing, it's not after we die in heaven or, far away, or after the conditions of life get better, or, we're not feeling, so depressed or whatever. So it's kind of, it's a tricky thing, it's really always right here, right now. And yet, we're covered over or we get lost in these other places within us. So then how, you may ask? My friends, so often people imagine God is way outside, far away in the universe, impossible to reach. This is far from the truth. The whole universe is within each person. Therefore, God is within each person. Each living creature has a part of God within. The only way to reach this divine part within is on the small and narrow path of self-development. The goal is perfection. The basis of this is to know yourself. To know yourself is indeed difficult, for knowing oneself means to face many an unflattering trait. It means a long, continuous, in fact, never-ending search. It's never done, right? The ego wants a goal and wants to get it done and be done once and for all, right? But we know that it's an ongoing process that is never ending. Takes at least a lifetime, and then I think it still continues. So the search is, what am I? What do my reactions, not only my deeds and thoughts, really mean? Are my actions supported by my feelings, or do I have motives behind these actions that do not correspond to what I like to believe about myself, or what I like other people to believe? Have I been honest with myself so far? What are my mistakes? We did unity and duality just a little while ago, which is it has this example of like feeling like we want to point the finger at the other guy, and we want to be right and make them wrong, right? So here's where we really have to pull back and think, okay, so even though it may seem that the other guy is all wrong, if I'm in this dynamic, if I'm suffering, if I'm struggling, then there's something going on with me. And so let me let go of looking at, taking the other guy's inventory in a sense, right? And come back and really explore what is going on inside of me. Who is this that is, feeling sort of the life or death battle of being right versus not being wrong. So uh, when we're in those kinds of situations, we know that there's an immature consciousness alive in us. And if we can bring our mature consciousness there, then, and also, from that place, call on our guides, call on our higher self, call on inner clarity, then, we can, do a lot to work with and heal and transform all of this. Or we can kind of get lost in it and just follow that its own process. And even when we do that, we can wake up and explore it in the aftermath. So although some of you may know your weaknesses, most people ignore a good part of them. And this presents a great hurdle, even for those who have reached a certain height on their upward path. You cannot overcome what you do not know. Each fault is nothing more or less than a chain that binds you. And, one of the things that I've noticed is it gets subtler and subtler, that we see, and it is kind of in the sophistic, the inner motives and the little mixed currents, right, that are there. So, in the beginning, we're looking for the big faults, and sometimes we don't even realize that, our own attempt to control ourself is a fault, right? So we have a lot to learn in this examination of faults. And then as we do, it takes us into the subtler levels of things to see, because it is a, energetic dynamic, and there's usually mixed currents in it. And the guide talks about this as well. So by the shedding of each imperfection, we break a chain and thus become freer and nearer happiness. Happiness is meant for each individual, but is impossible to attain without eliminating the causes of your unhappiness, which are your faults. And in some ways, if you think about it, the causes of our unhappiness, right? Unhappinesses are where we are suffering in some way. And where we are suffering, there's a natural fault, because life has pain, right? But it's the mind that creates the suffering, that creates the judgment, the place where we feel trapped and really lost in it, and it's our fault, or some kind of deep guilt or deep resentment, or story that feels like it's irredeemable, that we get stuck in, right? And that's what creates the suffering, and it's never real, it's all illusion. So that's the other real good reason why we want to just come into the present, right? And feel what's there, but in looking at it, looking at the thoughts, the stories that are behind it, and questioning, and kind of not denying, but just having an open, well, maybe that's the case, but maybe there's things I don't see yet. And so we can keep the field open and not deny something, but keep looking inside. So he's saying here, he goes on, even beyond this, like that we, where we have these faults, it's also about a trend that breaks a spiritual law. And then he says, even if you have a karma from a previous life, it can be dissolved provided you work spiritually to find yourself. And he also says that we could be completely happy without sickness, worries, or even death as we experience it. Yes, my friends, even death, if people were really perfect. And this is merely a theory, for if this kind of perfection is reached, reincarnation becomes superfluous. Your return to the spirit world would not happen by decay, old age, sickness, or accident. It would be a sort of dematerialization. But even if you have not yet come far enough to consider this, each one of you can approach this goal much faster than you may think possible. And for the time being, you can find out how you are on this path by viewing your life and your problems. How happy are you? What is lacking in your life? To the extent that unhappiness or discontent exist in your life, you have not fulfilled your potential. Let me pause there. Any comments, questions, any chiming in here at this point? So continuing, for those who really fulfill themselves, even if the outside result is not immediately noticeable, and the residue, the outside manifestation of the past remains, there will be a deep and peaceful contentment, security, and sense of fulfillment. So I don't know if you've ever experienced this, right? But when you really kind of, I don't know, like understand what's happening and the reason why it's there, and you're going through it, even though you may have even broken the spell and have shifted it, but the outside, the physical realm takes a little longer to catch up, right, to the spiritual understanding. And it's, we're still having to carry some of the, maybe discomfort or the difficulty that manifested as a result of our, confusion or imperfection. But once we've kind of cracked that code and we understand it, then it's not a burden anymore. It's not the suffering that it was, right? And we can bear it in contentment until it's completed in its cycle, and we can move into a better way. And so says, if you are lacking, you are not completely on the right path, or you have not reached the liberation you are bound to experience after the initial difficulties on the path are overcome. Only you will know the answer where you stand. No one else can or need answer this question for you. If you are on the right path, however, and you have that deep feeling of contentment and fulfillment, while yet there are still outer problems in your life, that should not discourage you, for the outer form of the inner conflict you may be working on right now cannot be dissolved so quickly. The effects of the law that you have been breaking for a long time have to be readjusted, and this takes time. The outside forms have to be remolded, remade. You yourself have to bring this about. the more you direct the inner currents into the right channels, the more the respective outside forms will gradually change, will change gradually but surely. So and that's, I think, is really, important too, is like, there's this kind of realization that we've been breaking the law, and then a recognition, that it's not needed and it's not aligned with spirit. And yet it's still habit in us, right? And so we make our choice and we make our prayer and we align in that, to transform and to no longer, or to work towards sort of, reprogramming or erasing that old program within us. And that sometimes takes time. And we maybe fall back asleep and fall back into it, so each time we do, it's like another opportunity just to remold and remodel and remake and re-imprint the soul substance. The guide uses that image sometimes. So you yourself, have to bring this about. So it's our free will choice, right? Our conscious effort. It's not about controlling ourselves, but it's about, kind of rewriting it each time we write it the wrong way, right? We have to go back and edit. So the more you direct the inner currents into the right channels, the more the respective outside forms will change gradually but surely. Until this process is completely affected, the outer problem cannot automatically dissolve. Impatience will only be a hindrance. If you are on the right path, you will live and feel the great reality of God's world in your daily life. And you will always be sustained by God's spirit world, which works with you and around you, helping and guiding you. And it will become just as real, if not more so, than your human surroundings. So like, we can really, imagine that, like if we had an interface and an interaction with God's spirit world that, was like as real as our human surroundings. And it certainly will no longer be a theory or mere intellectual knowledge, and we'll live in this world and feel its effects on ourselves. And this is something that I think we really need. We have these ideas and we all align with them. They make sense. We resonate. I think in some deep way we're recognizing the truth, right? But we have to have the direct experience. We have to embody it. We have to, know it from within our own experience. And that's, I guess, sort of a Gnostic position. It's like you don't want the priest to tell you what is. You want to know it yourself and your own inner authority. So God's spirit world is constantly at work to help humanity as a whole, as well as individually. And I love that, that it's really, they're all helping us, and boy, do we need it. Prayers for the world. It is part of the great plan that God's spirit world has a task to fulfill, but it is bound by very definite laws. And these laws, we violate by human beings and some spirits also, but those spirits do not belong to the divine order. These laws contain, among other things, the stipulation, if I may use this expression, that the free will of an individual must never be violated. So God's spirit world is therefore always waiting for people or spirits to reach out for help. But it can never and would never force its help on anyone. So this is also, I think, a beautiful model for us all, to really deeply honor and respect and recognize this free will of each individual. And that whenever we feel like we care and we want to offer help, which is a beautiful thing, right? But pay attention, to your own need to fix them or something like that, that might create a forcing current, or, kind of want them to do it a certain way, the way that you think it should be done and when it should be done. And again, each person has to come to this through their own. So each person has to wish for God's help and fulfill the necessary requirements first before this help is given. If this is not done, Spirit can interfere only in special cases according to law. Helping interference by God's world happens occasionally without the person having reached out for it, but only in cases when such help was earned, perhaps in a previous life, or even in the same life in a quite different area. Each spirit in God's world, which is a world of order, has a definite task. Many spirits' tasks relate to human beings. It is advisable for people to seek contact with the world of God and the spirits of God, for they and only they can help you and guide you on the proper path. So, that's an interesting statement, right? He's kind of like saying, well, without that, we can't find the path. And, I think he says in some ways this is true, in this earth plane, right? Which is, got darkness as well as light. The light comes from this world of God and from the spirits. And without it, we would be lost. And he says that there are, people that, kind of are not aware that how much help they're getting. Right. It's like oftentimes inspiration comes through our own thoughts, right. Or what like that. And so we kind of, the ego thinks it's doing it all, right, on its own. But what are our thoughts? Where do they come from? Where do especially the inspiring, higher thoughts that sometimes, we realize, oh, that's a new perspective or understanding, so I think we need to realize that maybe we are also in contact with them more than we think we are. So he says, whether we know it or not, often much guidance and inspiration is coming in from spirits. And he says now, though, that there's kind of a way that when we become open to, that there are spirits out there, he says some people may feel interested in contacting spirits, or sometimes, you just reach out and spirits show up that are other than those belonging to the world of God. And so he talks a little bit here about discernment, and it's, harm when we do that. And so I think it's also important as we begin to open our channels and, we begin to, connect in this way, that we realize, in the astral, there are many beings and not all of them are, any more evolved than we are, and some of them much less. So, and he says that, human beings tend to arrive to contradictory extreme conclusions, each equally wrong. One group finds it's useful to seek contact with any kind of spirit, and the other group reacts by thinking that contact with all spirits is wrong. So when we generalize, we're not making these proper distinctions. And he says, so contact with God's spirit world is not easy to obtain, and it should not be easy, for it is the highest struggle. You must indeed learn many things in order to receive the gift of such a contact. First of all, you have to climb the steepest path of self-development and purification, and you have to learn the special laws governing the communication with the spirit world of God. So, it kind of seems like, it's like he's saying, like, well, just ask. And then he's saying, but then there's all of these other, developments. And so maybe both are true. I think that there's also, like this way that we need to learn within ourselves to discern what is in, spiritual light and harmony, right? And so a lot of this path work that we do helps us make that distinction, like when the energy is in distortion or in, defense or in lower self, right? And what would be the alternative, or what would be, the understanding of the spiritual laws. And, like we know in a very simplistic way, that love is really the vibration of God and this higher spirit world. And so in a sense, whenever we're not completely fully loving, we're in some kind of violation. but we may not even realize, because we know we're a nice person and we see ourselves as a loving person, and we, go through life, trying to do good. And we don't actually go into our body and notice, even though that's true. It's a kind of superficial, safe place for love to exist in. And I think the love that is referred to here is, a much more powerful connection with the heart chakra, and a, very active form of loving that is not, again, necessarily in our doing, but coming through our being, right? And we can feel the difference from the kind of niceness versus the full-blown power of love. So, we're working, and we have to, continue to develop, to open to, these much larger capacities that I believe we all have. And by learning these special laws, both in terms of the spiritual laws, and then also how to communicate with, the spirit world of God, we can help our journey. So he says, these laws are different from those of unclean or merely blind and unknowing spirits. There are many ways you can find out which spirits you are dealing with. So there are ways to test a spirit to see whether it actually belongs to God's world or whether it only pretends to do so. And this is only if you kind of have a sense that you're talking, to another being. But even sometimes, you can feel your own, inner voice, speaking to you in a way that doesn't sound like, God's world, right? And so in that same way, you can, test it, because it's important, whether it's, our own inner idealized self-image, or, it's another entity of darkness that's tempting us, right? For us to recognize the difference between advice that, or energies that take us into, negativity or something like that, versus the alignment with spiritual truth. So he says, one test is that a spirit of God's world will not seek to satisfy its own vanity. It will not demand admiration for itself. It will be a humble servant and will always give God the honor. It will not claim to be the highest, for there is always someone higher. The highest is God. Any claim that a spirit has so much power that it has no one above it to consult, that it has authority for all and can decide without consulting higher spirits, should be enough proof that this is not a spirit of God. For whenever a spirit of God talks to you, it will tell you that there are many, many gradations, many hierarchies. Above all is the spirit of Jesus Christ, and above Jesus Christ is God. So any spirit claiming it has complete authority is not trustworthy. Furthermore, a spirit of God's world can be recognized by patience, love, and by the fact that, although occasionally it has to say unpleasant things in order to help further spiritual development, it will never humiliate or hurt in an unpleasant way. So, and I think this is true also, like, sometimes when we shift out of our idealized self-image and just see our faults through the eyes of our higher self, right? There's this way that we recognize, without any humiliation or shame or, feeling bad about these things, right? It's a gift to see it. And maybe we have some remorse, or, a little chagrin, or, feel a little humbled, but those are healthy things. Right?
Marlene, I have a question. Do you think the guide, I have to, is referring, when the God is talking about like spirit world and spirits, do you think that it is like since we all have like God spirits in us, do you think that he's talking about like inner relationships with each other, that if my spirit is, I don't know, like more like in a lower vibration, that I could hurt you because of where what spirit is in me. Sometimes as I'm sitting here listening, it's like I have this duality between thinking like, is the spirit world that the guide's referring to, is it something that is outside of ourselves, or is it actually spirits that we draw and we interact with amongst ourselves?
I think it can be both,
Mm.
right? I mean, I think it's all inside of ourselves. He says that in another lecture we just recently read, the whole universe is inside of us. So it's like, but what's inside of us is a vast universe, right? And some things may be attached to our field and may be part of our own, dynamic, so that we might be, if when we're expressing from that space in us, when we're acting out, when we're channeling that negative spirit that's connected with us, right, it certainly could provoke another person, right? But that's what he's saying in the beginning is that, it's like, if you can get provoked, there's some work that you have to do, right? It's like it's really, not about somebody else doing anything to you, right? It's like, I mean, maybe they are, but again, we can be with what is and other people's imperfection and lower development, right? And if we stay aligned in our own space of truth, love, and light,
Mm.
right, we can navigate that,
Mm.
and find ways of being with them or removing ourselves or whatever is appropriate in the moment, right? And
Yeah, or just knowing, what's coming at you is
right,
like,
not
and
getting
not
hooked.
in truth, and that your truth is when you seek the truth within, that's where you're going to get
Right.
your
And,
own power. Yeah, I just find this, I haven't read this section in a long time, and it's interesting around Halloween too, right? Talking about all the spirit.
partly why I've chosen it.
So, I just wanted to get a little bit clear about that.
Oh, and it is, I mean, I think that we're talking about deceased ancestors, some who have not passed on. There are, many, many beings in the astral, and there are many gradations of vibration in the astral. So, it's kind of like where we're vibrating at is where we're susceptible, right, to
Mhm.
some degree to other things, right?
Yeah.
And so, and the voices that come to us, even our own thoughts, like I said,
Mm.
can be, coming from a guide or an angelic, helper or some kind, right? That inspires me in this moment. And don't forget this, or say that, or
Mm.
something like that. A lot of times when you're sort of open and not controlling with your ego, right? Then the inspirations of the moment, that are because you're here present in the moment, can kind of come to you and flow through you, but it doesn't feel like it's you doing it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming in those cases
Mm.
that, a lot of it is other divine beings working through me, right? Holy Spirit working through me.
And I
And
and I and I think in this, like in the beginning when the guy was talking, that like that's what actually brings you fulfillment. When you actually feel whole and well-being is because
right,
you have received and were responsive to these
exactly.
spirits that you're calling forth. Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's kind of like there's all kinds of things that exist in the world. And so he's saying, so pay attention and, notice whether you're channeling your own or some other negative being.
Go away, go away.
And sometimes when it's our own, it's like, yeah, what's got you in such a bad mood? It's like
What are you not getting that you want?
Right. So we have to help unravel, and in some ways, I think even the other spirits, that sometimes we can help indoctrinate, or take them to a higher plane in certain situations. But again, we need to be able to recognize, what energies we're working with. And it may not feel like a voice, it can just feel like an energy sometimes. So he says again, like God's spirit world, it's like is going to speak to us the higher order of it, in a very, respectful, loving, gentle way. And so if we're hearing another voice in our head, our own or another entity's, that is, either flattering us, or is putting us down, or is, trying to correct us, but there's a kind of sense of righteousness and judgment in its voice, or, a sense of wanting to control, all of those things are evidence that it's not a very evolved spirit. And then we have to see, well, what it's with me, in what way, and what should I do with it, right? And sometimes it's just, oh, you're not me, never mind, I'm not going to listen to you. And other times it's maybe something within us that we need to work with. So he says these and many other tests can and should be made to recognize the identity of the spirits you are dealing with. Beautiful and even devout words in themselves are no proof, for many spirits bring high qualities from their lives that continue in the beyond, but for one reason or another, they really do not yet belong to the order of God's world. So in contact with God's spirit world, if contact with God's spirit world is made, it will result in a great blessing. For God's spirits are concerned to help each one of you to find the happiness I was talking about, so that none of you will have an empty life, lacking love, affection, respect, and the deepest fulfillment that can come only from reaching for spiritual development. It is the only purpose for such contact. Anything else would be secondary. And so he's saying, if you have another reason, like leave it to God, you can ask, you can go for it, but surrender it in the long run, and don't try to get into a forcing current with it. We can trust that if it's for us, it will come. And if you want happiness and are willing to pay the price, you must receive it. By the same token, if people want with all their hearts nothing else but God's truth and the fulfillment of God's will, they will receive that. So it is in the wish that the result is contained. Often the results cannot come immediately. I mean that the spirits of God cannot possibly manifest themselves immediately, for there must be many obstacles put out of the way first. So during this time, we're tested to see whether, we can handle such communication. If unclean or suffering souls find their way to a medium, the aim should be to teach them rather than allow them to have control. And this is one of the things, like we don't have a lot of education about mediumship of this nature, here in the West. But, in Brazil, I ran into quite a bit of it. And so, there's a lot of this understanding that, if we are mediums, which is kind of a natural state of most of us, right? And we're different kinds of mediums. So we may have different mediumistic capacities, and we may have our own unique ways of channeling. And so like Evo, channeled the wisdom of the guide, through, but there are also, and most of us to some degree are like transport mediums. And so there are, ways that where we have light, but we're still impure, the beings are both drawn to the light within us and also can kind of attach to us because of the impurities. And so there's a way in which during this time, it's kind of like the medium may feel like lots of different forces or some suddenly, propelling or wanting to act through you, and some of them could be, really great things, but other things might be seeming a little ungrounded or, and so there's a way that we have to both ground and indoctrinate, good spirits and some of these things, but also recognize like that some of the suffering souls that, like may have a lot of depression still. And we also, and sometime in our life suffered from depression. These beings can come to us and all of a sudden we start feeling depressed and we think it's us. And there's this, real important thing to begin to realize, like no matter what we're feeling, to consider that the feeling might be, uh, attracted to us, but the whole feeling is more than us. We actually have, brought and are now being a medium. We're channeling a certain energy vibration, maybe of depression, of anxiety, of, resentment, of jealousy, right? And these can also be, they're in us, but they're also beings out there that carry that. And when we're vibrating that way, plus we have our light, they come and connect. And so it's important for us when we're developing sometimes spiritually, to recognize that we might have the force of other energies with us that are moving out our dark aspects. And that can be useful because now we're forced to confront and see them, right? And take responsibility for them. And yet in a way, it's in the Bible, it says the spirits of the prophet are subject to the prophet. And in some ways that's saying we're responsible for what we're channeling into the world, no matter who it comes from or where it comes from, right? And yet that's not always so easy because, we are still sort of unconsciously channeling a lot of our own negativity and stuff, and then others come too. But it's a part of, I think, the education that we're in this process with the pathwork. And I think that the pathwork, whether the guide speaks to it directly, really is a kind of, the closest thing that we have to a kind of training for mediumship in the West. So let's see, where did I diverge? So he says, if unclean or suffering souls find their way to a medium, the aim should be to teach them rather than allow them to have control. They need to be helped with a firm hand, not the way they, being blind, imagine, but to put them on the spiritual path. As you seek for contact with God's spirits, you should not give up, but persevere in humility. Seek what is within you that prevents the clean spirits from manifesting themselves. Whenever you have contact with the spirit world of God, it is the highest, the most beautiful, and the most useful thing you can ever attain. For that, a price has to be paid. When you buy a house, the price will be higher than when you buy a shack. You accept that as natural. It cannot be otherwise. But it is not so easy to accept this principle when it comes to spiritual development and spiritual values. Yet whenever you give, you are returned 100-fold when spiritual values are concerned, whereas in material goods, there is an exact exchange at best. Salvation lies in the hands of each individual. Only you yourself can break the chains that hold you. But first, your wholehearted wish must grow bigger than all else. The spirits of God will then help you further. Okay, so now we go into quite a few Q&As. We still have an hour, so maybe we can get through quite a few of them. Anybody want to comment or question anything here? So the first question says, I don't understand something. You say we should be in contact with the spirit world of God and that other spirits will harm us spiritually and even physically. But then also everything is God's world. So I don't understand. So the answer is like this. There is God's great creation with its wonderful laws, and it includes all the spirits he has created and to whom he has given free will. A great number of these spirits have voluntarily accepted God's laws and his order and have thus remained happy. A great number of other spirits have broken that order again voluntarily, and by that act they have created unhappiness and disharmony for themselves. For happiness can lie only in the wisdom of God's laws. All spirits who have at one time or another broken this law and have yet not found their way back to recognize this law as the only wisdom, and again, you can think of the law as love, right? That we have not yet recognized that love is the only wisdom, the only right course, right? And we can't hold to love firmly. We get triggered, we get defensive, we get afraid, we get, so where we lose love, we're falling outside of the law. And we are in this place where only voluntarily can we sort of try to choose love again, to recognize that law and to work towards living that truth. So it says, all the spirits who have at one time or another broken this law and have not yet found their way back to recognize this law as the only wisdom, the only right course, stand outside this order voluntarily, right? So we just haven't chosen to be part of it. And God would not want, to force us, right? And one day, we could voluntarily accept it now, and one day we will. But as long as this does not happen by our own choice, our own volition, our own conviction, our own understanding, right, then we naturally have to remain outside the world of God. And God does not force any creature. Choice has to come from the free will of each individual. Ultimately, and such is the beauty and perfection of God's laws, every single child of God will return to the enlightenment, wisdom, to the happiness and freedom that can be found only in divine law. There are almost as many human beings as spirits who fall into one or the other of these two categories, those already belonging to the divine order and those outside of it. The former are perhaps helping, working, cooperating in the great plan of salvation. The entities in this group, among other things, find out in spiritual endeavor where they are still unconsciously deviating from the laws. So our efforts here at helping, also bring out, where our imperfections still exist. And so, in this incarnation, we're working for others, and we're also still purifying ourselves. And then there are those, many of them, who do not accept God's laws, who create chaos in their surroundings and in their own selves by wanting to follow their own very incomplete laws. So the next question, he says, I would like to ask, how is it possible to contact one's personal guide? So the answer, this can be done only if the purpose is to follow the path of perfection, to help one's own development, to solve a particular problem. And this wish has to be very strong and sincere, not half-hearted at all. This must be truly the only reason, with no sense of sensationalism or curiosity mixed into this wish. If and when this is recognized by the spirits of God, and it might take considerable testing, as well as patience and endurance, for the wish must not be given up too soon, then such contact will be established. The personal guide of the individual in question will make itself known, provided the answer cannot be obtained another way, let us say through other human beings. For God's spirits do not answer questions that can be answered in your own world. It is not their task to help you avoid a little bit of effort to find out. They answer only those questions which would be impossible for you to find an answer to through human channels. I found this an interesting response, because I know for the longest time, I've I've wanted to contact my guide, right? Or find out who my guide is. And what I finally came to the conclusion of is, like my guide and my life is my guide, right? My guide comes to me through all of the things that happen in my life, through the people that talk to me, through the events that arise, and so in some sense, this is aligned with that, right? It's like those answers are coming, and I'm still seeking and still in this place of questioning, because I don't think I've had this experience of really having something come to me that I couldn't have known, wouldn't have known otherwise, right? And so there's some teachings that say that the whole understanding of the universe is our birthright, is our inheritance. And there is so much we don't know, and there's so much that we have to learn, which is a beautiful thing, and I think some of those questions, when we are ready and deserving, right, is kind of what our guides can bring to us. And also in the same way that, so much probably that the guide brought to Eva, that was sort of new to the world in many ways, right? So, and yet building on many things as well. So if all these requirements are fulfilled, you will eventually establish contact one way or another. There are many questions a personal guide can and will gladly answer. For instance, you do not know what the will of God is in a particular situation. If you want to discover unconscious trends and emotions, now I have found it very useful to, call on the light and help with that. Or if you find yourself in some kind of disharmony with your fellow creatures and do not know the reason. If such a situation occurs, you may be quite sure that no matter how flagrantly wrong the other person may be, there must be something within you that is responsible. This and similar questions will be answered if you open the door for truth. And this can only happen if you are prepared to accept the truth under any circumstances, even if you should hear what you least want to hear. If you overcome the natural resistance to hearing an unflattering or uncomfortable truth, your door is open and we can get through. And here I want to do a little aside, because, it's like we have natural resistance, and we also have, I think, resistance to hearing unflattering or uncomfortable truth, because our ISI, this internalized parental judging voice, takes those truths that might be unflattering or uncomfortable and turns them into kind of a battering ram against us, right? And so I think somehow deep inside our vulnerable parts, right, are very afraid of truths, because they're afraid that they're going to get judged, and it's going to be their fault, or something is going to come down on them like that. And so this is where I feel myself in so many ways, that right next to connecting with our guidance, right next to opening this channel, we have to begin to recognize and help heal, help calm, help help the idealized self-image, who to me is really another frightened child, and needs also to be held in the love and the light of God, and needs to connect with the voice of the higher self instead of the voice of the judge and the critic, because it's like the ISI internalize that voice and then becomes it, right? Trying to avoid pain, and it does just create twice as much suffering and pain. So when we can realize that truth can be given in a loving, compassionate, hopeful, healing way, and that ultimately what I've often discovered is when I've gone into my child wound to see the truth, right, and I see that there's a lower self peace in it, when I penetrate fully into that lower self peace, what I discover is the suffering child, right? Who's simply trying to do her best to survive. And, in seeing the truth behind that, I can forgive, I can come in comfort, I can, help lead the child out of this hell realm back into connection with spirit and God and the light, and feeling that it, is worthy of God's love and can receive this contact from God's spirit world, because this is often, what is blocking us. So let's see. If you overcome the natural resistance to hearing an unflattering or uncomfortable truth, your door is open and we can get through. I might add here that even if you do hear occasionally something you have feared to hear, you will be extremely happy after you have thus established contact. Not only because truth always has this effect, but also you will then know for the first time that this spirit world with all its laws is a reality and not a theory. And this will make you very happy indeed. The way the answer can be received varies greatly, but one way may be that while you meditate and become still and ask this question, wanting only truth and God's will, suddenly a new thought comes to you. This thought will grow, and the more it grows, the more you will see how right it is. There will be no doubt about the rightness and truth of this thought, no matter whatever angle you consider it from. This may be one way, and it is called the way of inspiration. Later on, you may directly perceive a new voice within you that sounds quite different from your usual thoughts or ideas. Or you may see something that will give you the answer in picture form. Often such answers are given a little later through another human being who will be inspired. Just this kind of an answer may be a test for you to gauge how you receive it, how you react. God's spirit world has many ways of working and presenting necessary knowledge to you. Establishing contact is always up to you, however, and it always requires your openness. Then you will receive. If you are patient and you do not want only one particular answer, or if you are not set in your mind to receive the answer in one particular way, but leave to God as to how it will come to you, then you will gradually establish a perfect and wonderful contact. Perhaps it will feel different from what you have imagined, but whatever God decides will ultimately be best for you. So when seeking such personal contact, this should be your motive, and this should be the way to go about it.
Darlene,
Yeah.
have you ever had an experience where you were using like an oracle card, deck of cards, and you ask, like whatever the question would be, and you shuffle the cards, and for myself, like sometimes a card will just jump up and jump out, and I'll read it, and it's just so right on target with
Exactly.
with the guidance that I need. And I know for me, like it gives me like a sense of that connection from my spirit guide,
Yeah.
and then sometimes I doubt it. Sometimes I think, oh, it's too real to be real. Like I have, I try not, it's gotten less doubtful, but sometimes it's that powerful.
Yeah. And I think always, it's this interaction between our own psyche and whatever the messenger is, right? And so, like the tarot archetype that you drew, in one instance will have a different meaning maybe than another, because there's this moment, that the question is coming through. But yeah, many people I think do use divination cards and pendulums and muscle testing, right?
Yeah.
I find myself, like I can't get past my self-doubt, like you're saying, but I do recognize, like, like that moment of, oh, they're talking to me, and the
Yeah.
upliftment that gives, right? However it comes to us, it's a great gift when we feel it, it confirms and makes us sense and, recognize, yeah, there's
Yeah.
help out there. I'm not alone. God cares. It's like there's help I can ask, and it will be answered. So beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Or sometimes it comes up like a guide, just act like a deer today in your day's life, or be busy like a bee, or what.
Yeah.
It's funny. You can have fun with it too.
Yeah. So this question was interesting to me, and I don't know that I quite totally agree. But anyway, we'll listen to what the guide has to say, and I'll argue with him later. So, and it's not completely, but it's like the question is, what is the relationship between the divine within, aka the higher self or the spark, right? And a master or a guide who comes to speak. Uh, for instance, the guide speaking through Eva, or somebody has a master who speaks to them. How is my own divine self or this medium's divine self related to such a master? So answer. I will answer this question first, generally speaking, on what the difference is between the divine spark or the divine self, as you call it, or an entity of God's spirit world. For many people, it is indeed not always clear what speaks to them. It is the subconscious, the superconscious, or the divine spark or higher self, right? And in some ways, it's like it's all in the unconscious, to some degree, right? So all of these aspects are in our unconscious, and also in the body, and which is largely the unconscious. So, we have, all of these different aspects. And so is the higher self another entity? He says it's not very easy to answer that question, and it is even more difficult to determine the difference between the divine spark or higher self and, the guide, I guess. And I've heard before Seth and other, channels kind of speak like somehow they are connected to the higher self of the medium in various ways, monad situations or whatever. So, but let's see what the guide has to say. He says, let's begin with the subconscious first. The subconscious voice is very quick to answer and quite distinct and often loud. So this might be our defenses or our reactions, or, quick, immediate. The only way for a person to determine whether it is the subconscious or one of the other two alternatives is to become still and do exactly what I have recommended in my answer to the question concerning contact with God's world. If all the conditions mentioned in my answer are fulfilled, God's truth will and can come through. And it doesn't matter whether it is through one's own divine self or through an entity belonging to God's world. For both abide by the spiritual laws and fulfill God's will. It is the wish to fulfill if the wish to fulfill God's will is more than merely wishful thinking or fear, then the answer will be given. Only the individual can determine whether the wish for truth is greater than any self-delusion, wishful thinking, or anxiety. This has to be done through objective self-analysis and self-testing. Vanity or the desire to impress other people may be in the way. This is the greatest stumbling block on the spiritual path. And there are many teachings about developing mediums, right? Who get kind of allured by their, newfound capacities and start, taking it on in an egoic way, right? So this way of really understanding how to be in service and not sort of identifying with all of this is an important part of the development and how we have to kind of purify ourselves. So if this test is passed and the resistance is overcome, the answer can be given from the self to the self or from the guardian spirit, or what you call a master. The answer will come with a very small, soft voice that will not be pushing or pressing. It does not shout, it is quiet, almost impersonal voice without any force behind it, contrary to what often comes from the subconscious. So let us turn now our attention to the part of your question about the difference between the higher self and the spirit creature of God. It actually does not make much difference whether a voice comes from one or the other. Now, all of this I'm agreeing with. I haven't come to my argument yet. So, as I've said, both want the same thing. The point is interesting only in a technical sense. The higher self certainly manifests itself, but it cannot always come through clearly, for it is covered by many layers of imperfection, layers of dense matter, all the distortions that necessitate life on earth. If these layers were not present, life on earth would be superfluous. If the higher self could manifest itself as easily as all that, you would not have to live again and again. You would be advanced far enough to have to go through further incarnations. Yet wherever there are faults and imperfections, the higher self is barred. And this is the reason God has sent his helpers, for they have the ability to work through your blocks where your own higher self cannot yet do so, right? So that also makes some sense to me, right? And again, I'm not thinking that I'm, like just of the, clear manifestation of another voice telling me what to, what I'm missing. But, these inspirations, these ways that new understandings come, even as we do our work in these process groups, or in our helper sessions or whatever, right? It's like as we move out sort of the negative, we're always seeking truth, and the voice of truth comes usually to us in some way in our own self-recognition. So furthermore, the voice of your own higher self, and this is where I'm not so sure, maybe so, is so far away and soft, sometimes so inaccessible, that it does not speak clearly to you in so many words, but acts simply by guiding you to heed what you call conscience. So conscience, yes, small, inaccessible. Sometimes in my own journey, what I'm exploring and this, is that like presence, right? This term presence, right? Sort of pure being consciousness, right? My objective observer, I think, is probably how the guide would talk about it, right? In some of the other lectures, he talks about the objective observer being the aspect of our, egoic incarnated self that has access and is the connection to the higher self. So I'm finding that, the space of presence, whether I'm sitting and just being presence to my inner sensations in my body, or presence to nature, or presence to a class of people, or presence to somebody as they're doing their work, like that energy of just being with, of awareness, of presence and openness and spaciousness, and not knowing in some sense, right? Receptive. This is an aspect for me that feels like we can develop of our higher self, and will help us to access that still small voice. Because also to get present, we have to get calm. We have to, go into this place of inner stillness a little more. And I think that maybe when the guide first was, channeling this back in the 1950s, right, not so many people had access to this aspect of themselves as we do now. And I feel like it's coming on more and more, and more people are, recognizing and waking up to this. So he says that also the higher self can influence us to, fight our lower self. The higher self, when listened to, can make itself known in the course of life through actions and reactions, but it cannot converse with us in the way a spirit can. And, so I've never exactly heard a spirit talking to me directly either. So, I'm not quite clear, like, but I do, feel like the intimations of truth coming to me, and whether it's from my own higher self or the spirit world, like the guide says, all in all, it doesn't really matter, right? And in all cases, the prerequisite requirement is to get still inside, to get present, to get calm, and go into this open, patient, receptive space. In the case of the medium, the higher self cannot manifest itself to such an extent that it can lecture for an hour and answer questions. So he's saying, like, it's not Eva's higher self, it's another spirit being. If this were possible, this medium would have reached such heights in development. So it's like also saying that maybe the guide is more highly developed than, the higher self of, but I think the higher self is always the God self. So I don't know how it can have different levels of development, but clearly the personality, right, is not able to, reach the same level of development that the higher self. That's, I think, the other way that I sometimes see the higher self is, like, in the spirit world, I think, who we are is much, much more than what is incarnated, right? Like the full being of ourselves, like, kind of takes parts of its, brilliance and its wisdom and its love, and also, sends that down into the earth sphere, and on the way picks up these, layers of, imperfected material, and so it's not all of who we are. So to access the fullness of our true self, we would be much more, and maybe even that true self of us, they say in some circles, I've read in channeled material, like that one central being that is our essential nature, right, has many incarnations in many different times, in many different, worlds. So I don't know, I find that an interesting thing to, imagine. And again, it comes out of a lot of the teachings of spirit about, this other level of the spirit reality. So he says it's easier to accomplish, though, like a channeling like Eva did, with the another spirit rather than the medium's own spirit. And even this is difficult. Blocks have to be cleared away for this 1 hour. In other words, the higher self acts and guides to a certain extent, but it does not speak coherently. It inspires thought, but it does not speak the way I speak through this medium. So we're not going to hear the higher self like as a voice talking to us. Or it does not speak in a way capable of being heard. Okay. So about the guy, there's a personal question that somebody, had asked, I guess. Let's see. The question: I understood you to say that if one is in disharmony with another person, it is necessarily one's fault. So the answer is, the guy says, I did not say that. The actual disharmony present doesn't always have to result from one person. It's not just one person to blame. But if disharmony can reach you, and you may not be to blame for, creating the disharmony, but if that disharmony affects you, then there must be some imperfection in you. So if we can clear away our own imperfection, then another person's disharmony can't, make us suffer. And that's where we really have a kind of, command over our living, and our freedom and our joy and that kind of thing, because other people can't take us down, can't make us fall, right?
Elaine, quick question about that. I'm
Uh-huh.
trying to make a distinction. So I other people's darkness still can be felt, obviously. So somebody else's aggression would still be recognized and reflected in the body, right? Kind of like the guy was talking about that the mask self has a very kind of high-pitched neon, kind of unnatural kind of sense flavor to it, right? So the distinction, I guess, while we're in the body is that you can still sense the other person's kind of darkness and energetic pokiness and hooks and all that kind of stuff. It's just that you wouldn't get tangled up by it. It wouldn't move you to a great degree. You would just recognize it and not get velcroed into it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. If some way you are feeling affected by it, other than, just kindly, like recognizing, understanding what it is, and being sort of neutral, where you might be available for spirit to, inspire you to, have an intervention that can actually help the person, right? In their darkness or whatever. You don't have to, like, sometimes I use the analogy that's like, they might be sending out daggers, but we're reaching up and guiding them in, right? Let them blow by you or whatever. That there's a way in which, if we're getting into reaction, then there's something in us that really, this is like a good enemy sort of revealing what's inside of us, that's for us to work on. And it's not our business. It's not for us to take their inventory. Maybe we can help them if we don't go into reaction, or if we don't go into reaction. A lot of times, it's like, it's where the guide says a lot, like one person can change the entire dynamic of a relationship, because it is a dynamic. And when you're not reacting the way everybody is expecting, then the whole thing shifts. And something new can come forth, and a deeper truth, or, the love can show up underneath. So that, I think you said it. Anything more on that?
I've got a quick question, Darlene.
Yeah, no, I'm good, Darlene. Thank you.
Okay.
On that, is it still possible to respond to that person from a place of centered power without that's what I sometimes
Not only is
do.
it possible, it's your responsibility, but so I'm not talking about being passive, but I'm not talking about, like in this case, in my experience, it's like, it's good to be very, very neutral, to surrender to whatever it is first, right? If we have not reached surrender to it being as it is, and we think for some reason, any reason at all, that we have to control it, change it, fix it, point it out, anything like that, then we're still working from control. Now, once we've truly, truly surrendered, then often my experience is that, the guides and guardian angels come in and show, inspire, all of a sudden I feel impelled to, say something that I wouldn't ordinarily say in that situation, or respond, with a deep, loving compassion that, wasn't there before, right? So there's a way that when I follow sort of this inner guidance that comes out of sort of deep stillness first, deep surrender, then I can make an amazing intervention oftentimes. That is exactly what the situation needs, and why we're there. It's like, there's always this possibility. We're there to heal each other. We're there to serve each other. We're there to, but we can't do it from the ego. We have to be, in our higher self. Does that feel right? Or
Oh, yeah, I was muted. That feels right. I guess the simple way that I would say it is to respond instead of react.
absolutely. And I would say that, there's an adult place. We talk about, many years ago, there was transactional analysis, and it was very simple, but very brilliant, way of looking at things. So, you have your child ego consciousness, your parental ego consciousness, and those two are like the ISI and the, wounded child always, in this battle, and then you have this adult consciousness that's kind of just the facts man, the objective observer again, and so, that's, if we can even get there and just speak from a rational place, I think that's good. But inspiration is even better. And so, I think what we're all really longing to do is to, yes, not, first of all, not react. And then, like if there's some, beautiful adult response that can help, or can, calm the war, help create peace, help, resolve the defenses in some way, and you're sensing it, and it seems good. Oftentimes, if we just try to come again from rational and somebody is in their feelings still, it won't reach them. And that's why I sometimes feel like this deeper kind of spirit-led place is really what is going to work the best in any given situation. And whether we can access that, of course, is not always, but that's the practice, right? If we can.
Nice, thank you.
So he says, I did not say the actual disharmony present doesn't always result from one person, but if disharmony can reach you, there must be some imperfection in you. And then the question is, but how is one to know that? And the answer, for example, by asking the help of your spirit friends, if you cannot find the answer by following this path, by getting to know yourself, each corner of your soul, your reactions. The answer cannot always be found immediately. The cause of the disharmony is not always on the surface. It may be buried deeper. Its origins may be in a whole chain reaction, one thought leading to another, until finally the manifestation appears outside, brought upon by the faults of others as well. If you continue on this path, self-honesty becomes second nature, so that you will have complete understanding about all your inner motives, past and present. When you know all your emotions, shortcomings, and wrong attitudes, you will be able to connect all outer happenings with them. And he often says this, like if you're in a difficult outer happening, like just kind of, your main flaws, right? Run through them briefly, to see, okay, are any of them here now, present, right? Our faults are typical, chains that bind us, right? And if we're having difficulty, again, we often, feel the problem is coming outside of us, but to always go through your own list, like, where is my demanding, forcing current? Where is my, one up, one down? This makes me better than you. Where is the right and wrong? Where is the, like all of these, places where we, kind of try to approach reconciliation, but we want to we still want to be right. We still want to tell the other person how to be better, and then we'll be happy. Okay, the immediate cause of the disharmony may be another person, either entirely or partly. However, when you are on this path, it is so important to know that whenever anything unpleasant occurs outside or inside, it can only be the effect of a cause. Therefore, you should find time to meditate as soon as possible and ask yourself, what in you could have directly or indirectly brought this about? How are you the cause of this effect? Which imperfection could be connected with this? And if you really want to find out this particular truth, if nothing in you shies away from it, you will find the answer. This I can promise you. This is one case where God's spirits can and will help you establish contact with you. Your thoughts will be guided slowly, provided the wish for truth is sincere and not superficial. This is quite an important point. And I can feel in myself, there are many faults or many parts of me that I confront in daily living, and I know I am not ready to take them on with this depth of sincerity and desire. Right. And then I accept kind of the consequences and don't blame other people or God or anybody else. Right. But, for many of us, I mean, in some senses, like that phrase in the Bible, that where God wants us to have no other gods before him, right? What does that mean? That means nothing to us matters more than God's will, not our own comfort, not our own pride, not our own, own desiring, right? Somehow. And so, the guide says God's deepest desire is our own desire. So there's a kind of a false duality in this, but in some way, if we can't make the sacrifice, and he often talks about that as well, right? Of the self, then we can't fully receive the whole possibility of what he's leading us into, right? That there is this movement into the truth of our fullness of like kind of going through all of the tests and the journey and the challenges of this incarnation, right, is to kind of take it to the moment of our death and kind of present it to God, right? Offering our life really even daily to God, but certainly at the end of our life, right? And so we want to be conscious, like, okay, I know I'm holding back in some places. I know I see some faults that, I'm not really willing yet to let go of, or I have some attachment to some addictions, that my ego doesn't want to give up yet for God. I'm not sure how I got quite on that topic, but oh yeah, your question, right, Richard?
Darling, I would say, from my personal attitude or relationship, is that I think I'm more willing to hear the truth than I am to surrender to the will of God. It's just that, it's like I want to, if I get the truth and understand the truth, I want to do something with it myself. I don't want God to do it for me. And because I guess I fear that, I'm not going to be able to follow that will. It's going to be too difficult.
Right.
To follow the will of God.
Right. And that may or may not be true, but that's a common image that we have. What does God want us to do? Go be crucified like Jesus? I'm not sure I want to do that.
Exactly. The ultimate. Yeah. The ultimate will of God. It's like, not my will, but thy will be done.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I hear you.
And I think maybe as far as communication with your guiding spirits go, I mean, that's where the doorway is. When you can open up to that will, let go of your will and open up to thy will, that's when the door really opens.
Exactly.
But I don't know that for sure, but I kind of got a sense that might be the doorway.
Yeah. Yeah. But what you said in the beginning is also like showing, like you're on the path, right? Because, really wanting, like I think most of us, that's where we begin, like we begin to want the truth more than, hide from the truth, right? And in some ways, surrendering to the truth helps us practice surrendering to God. And so each time we're willing to face and receive the truth, there's a way in which, we have to kind of, face and feel and die a death maybe, in some area, and yet in the process of doing that, we discover it's the truth that sets us free. That's where life is. That's And so in the same way, the duality of, oh, I don't want to suffer, I don't want to be in pain, and I'm afraid that, I mean, life has that, right? So we try to control life to keep ourselves safe, to keep us out of pain and suffering, and yet control itself is what creates most of it. And when we can learn to surrender that control and go through the little bits of pain that are part of life, we don't create the big suffering that we do when we're trying to avoid it. And there's this movement that carries us into, through, and out the other side. And that, it's sort of like the death, the life, death, and resurrection, right? Resurrection follows whatever we fear is the death, and the giving up of something that we want or need, and oftentimes, like, we desperately think we need it, and yet, again, the only real need we have is for God. So clinging to that to some degree keeps us from knowing and feeling the truth of God. And then so God has to take us to a place where we have to he has to rip it away from us so that we are bereft of it in some way, so that we can discover that what's real and what's really needed is not that was a substitute for the freedom of God, for the freedom of life, for the soul does not have to be, trapped in fear anymore. And of course, we're not there yet, but I think this is the promise that these lectures are offering. So, and the question isn't, acknowledging how honesty is very difficult. And he says, of course, the honesty is difficult. And the questioner says, sometimes you think you are honest, but if you go deeper and deeper, you see something else there. And the answer, the way is steep and narrow and long, but your own will is going to determine whether you will be victorious. The difficulty, and I would say not your outer will, right, but your own willingness, right, your own spiritual will. But the difficulty of the honesty can be overcome by the proper meditation about self-honesty, and then by asking yourself, why is it so difficult? If you ask that question, you can give yourself the answer. If you have the why, it will be easy to meditate on the issue. The answer is usually, and here I speak quite generally, that one does not like to recognize and part with a weakness. One does not like to break a wrong inner reaction or attitude. One does not wish to pay the price. The lower self likes to remain in the same old hole, to strain rather than change. I love that phrase. I recognize that, like we'll stay in strain rather than change. Once this is recognized, the next step is easier. The recognition that you dislike putting aside your ego or your vanity or whatever else it may be enables you to handle the sluggishness of your lower self using the spiritual truths you have learned so far. Once you have found why you have such difficulties with the lower self-resistance, and I want to, comment here, like that's where the work is, right? That's what we're always looking for, like we use the affirmations, we use the alignment with the light to bring out where the resistance is, to feel in ourselves, like we can affirm, oh, I'm a child of God, and the voice inside, that resists that, says, no, you're not, you're not even worthy of that, or you don't want to be, God's a big, bully, or, whatever. But the voice will, show where the resistance lives and where that resistance comes from. And so, that's where the work is always, is to discover where the no within us is, and see what can be done to convert it into a yes. The part of you that says, no, I won't, accept that the other person, has their truth in this position, and I only want them to see my truth, right? why not? What does that know about, right? That's where the work is. So again, once you have found why you have such difficulties with the lower self-resistance, you have attained a great deal more than you think. It is better to find out about this inner resistance and treat it methodically than to overcome a superficial mistake in action only. So again, just correcting yourself on the outer is not going to help. We need to understand our inner motives of all of these different energy consciousnesses within us. For then the root may very well remain if we just do the action and don't go deeper, and nothing is gained. As long as an evil is not torn out by its roots, it can always reappear under certain conditions. The right outward action in such a case actually becomes a lie. It is therefore better to commit a fault outwardly again and again if it is recognized and treated by meditation, than to act unsustained by your true inner nature. If you can find the answer within you, in such a case, you will experience a wonderful victory, a sense of relief, of liberation, of peace and truth. And thus you will be a step nearer to God. Do you understand? So any questions on that answer? So question, in organized churches, there are priests, and I have childhood memories in mind. And when you ask them, is this good or is this a sin? They would always say, you know the answer very well yourself. Do you think priests like that are inspired? Yes, of course. People can find many answers themselves if they really want to. But aside from answers that pertain to personal development, to self-knowledge, to one's own faults, it is necessary to gain knowledge from without. For example, take the knowledge of spiritual laws, or knowledge how to overcome certain faults and find help in attaining purification. If that knowledge from without is not given, it is often impossible to find the right answer or to know what to do next. The more knowledge is gained from without, the more right answers one can give oneself from within. So I like that answer, right? And in some ways, I think the priest may be referring to our inner conscience, right? But we have these, the superimposed conscience that confuses oftentimes and complexifies this reading of our inner conscience. But deep inside, oftentimes, if we feel in conflict, that it just means that there's work to be done and we're not ready to make a choice yet. And so to work that through, we'll bring it into clarity and the truth that you're going to need. To just try to ignore it and pretend or jump over the conflict, it's going to have to come back again. You're going to have to work it through. So question, how come great individuals, scientists, artists, in other words, the great geniuses of history, never manifest through a medium? Do they manifest in direct contact with those who are the right receptacles but are not mediums? Answer, this is impossible to answer in a general way. There are many whose task in the spirit world is to inspire people who have a similar talent. The reason that they very seldom, if ever, manifest through mediums is a very good one. And although there are many mediums who claim that such and such has spoken through them, that is not true. God's spirit world does not want this kind of contact because it tempts the respected medium or people belonging to a particular group to feel important and superior. This should not be. Besides, it does not mean more if, for example, a Goethe speaks through a medium than any other spirit of the divine order. But if Goethe would speak here, it might give the medium the opportunity to say, Goethe speaks through me. The others would also be impressed and would perhaps look down on those who have no Goethe. God's spirit world wants to avoid this. So whenever such a thing occurs, it is to be taken very, very carefully. Further, not all of the great geniuses are in their spiritual development as far advanced as in their particular talent. Their fate in the spiritual world may be no different than that of anyone else's. so no general statement can be made. Some of these geniuses are reincarnated. Some of them live in the spiritual world in a sphere of purification. Some of them go to school there. Some of them prepare for the next life. Some of them have a task in the spirit world to fulfill, either in connection with their talent or they have to perfect something else now. And some of them may have already reached a higher sphere of perfection. I will retire now and say to each one of you, none of you should ever feel alone. God loves each one of you clearly and dearly. The love of God is with all of you. Be in peace, follow this path. It will bring you happiness. May God bless all my friends. Okay. Got all the way through. I thought it was a very, interesting lecture. And so thank you for coming. Any final comments, questions before we close?
I think we need to get on some of those spiritual laws next.
Yeah.
I mean, because he just talked a lot about spiritual laws in the beginning of the lecture.
Right. And I think we have a recording. We did kind of go through and discuss that whole handout that
Yeah,
one Pathwork group had done, compiling all of them. They're kind of scattered through the lectures. So,
yeah,
but yeah. And for me, there's a simple thing that it feels like the compass, right? Is it of love? Is love and truth present, right? Like those are the two things, truth and love, and love without truth, doesn't have the full thing, and truth without love doesn't have the divine current, right? Carry the divine current. But when we can, harmonize as true and really understand, that love is, like the guide says, a spontaneous soul movement. So we can't, but when we can know that we're not in that space of love, then we can be a little more circumspect and a little more self-responsible. And when we are in that space of love, as we develop and discover the moments that it kind of comes through us, then I think we can, have the joy of channeling that love out into the world, however it comes naturally from our being, right? And that it will bring harmony and goodness. So that's kind of my shorthand for all of those spiritual laws. Is it love and truth or not? Okay, everybody.
thank you, darling.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Darlene.
Good night.
Thank you,
Good
Darlene.
night. Good night,
Bye, everyone.
everyone.
Good night. Oh, Jane,
Yes.
you want to